everybody. Um, Welcome to our second week of virtual learning. I hope you all had a really good weekend and you're well rested. Although I gotta believe you're pretty well rested overall, right? This has got to be your most relaxing school ever. Um, so this week, what we're going to do is we are going to move through the war. Last week, we covered Pearl Harbor and we talked about Blitzkrieg and Hitler expanding across Europe and how that started to make the United States nervous, and we started to kind of lessen our neutrality. Well, as you learned last week, the thing that ultimately is going to make us forget about neutrality is being bombed by Japan. So up to this point, we've really just been talking about Germany. So some of you last week may have been like, where'd Japan come from? But as you already knew, they were invading China. We didn't like it. We end up putting an economic ban on all of their money and assets in the United States. They see it as an ultimatum, and they launch a surprise attack on American holdings in the Pacific. So the attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, a date that you do need to know, December 7th, 1941. You must know that day in history. It is a day where they don't just attack Hawaii, the harbor at Hawaii, Pearl Harbor. They also attack the Philippines, the Malay Peninsula, other holdings of America in the Pacific. There are, however, 2,400 casualties at Pearl Harbor, and 1,177 of them are entombed, are soldiers that are entombed on the USS Arizona. It was hit and it sunk so quickly that those men went down with the ship, and they are still entombed on that ship. There were over 20 sets of brothers on that ship. So the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, it just wakes the United States up. It's been famously said that Japan, when they bombed Pearl Harbor, woke a sleeping giant. They saw the United States as weak. They saw our politics and how conflicted it was, and how we fought, and how we all looked different. We were a very diverse population, and they thought there was no way the United States could unite against a common enemy. A lot of people before them had underestimated us. And I would say, if you look at what goes on today, if you were to look at social media and our news, we are a very divided country politically. But when there is a crisis, we unite to get through it. And I think you're going to see a lot more of that as this pandemic starts to spread, and the issues regarding it start to expand. Americans are going to work together. So we do that most famously, though, in World War II. So on December 8th of 1941, Franklin Roosevelt is going to issue the Declaration of War. In his speech, he makes probably one of the most famous statements in all of American history. He says, "Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date that will live in infamy." He says that it's a day that changes history. In your web quest, you guys had to answer why it was a turning point, why it's a pivotal moment in history, and your answers for the most part were really good. And it just transitions the United States. We walk onto this, or pulled onto this world stage, and in previous wars, when those wars ended, we came back and tried to be isolationist and neutral. World War II marks the end of that. Once we get out on that stage, we say we're never going back, because what ends up happening is you fools start a bunch of wars and we get sucked in and have to fix it. So we're staying out here. So the United States is going to have to go from a period of committed neutrality to becoming war ready. And you saw a lot of evidence of that in the video that you watched Friday. I hope you enjoyed it. So here are the major highlights I just kind of want to talk to you about. First is always is recruitment, right? We need men to fight the war. After Pearl Harbor is bombed, you know already that we had the peacetime draft that FDR had implemented. Well, men are going to volunteer for this war. So growing up, my dad taught my sister that girls don't fight. My dad taught me that if anybody ever hit me, I was required to hit them back. It wasn't he said, don't throw the first punch, but if someone hits you, you darn well better know how to hit back. Yeah, that's kind of out of fashion today, except for you that have military parents. You know that it'll never go out of fashion in the military. The Marine taught me how to land a punch. We were sucker punched, as a matter of fact, because it was a surprise attack on December 7th. And so American men and women will join the war in numbers that are just enormous and staggering because they want to fight back. They want to protect America. So we've got obviously a large male population that joins, and then you've got women as well. So women are going to be very close to the front line in this war. They will, of course, be nurses, as historically they always have been, but they're also going to go into the flight corps. They will actually be the test pilots. They will go and they will practice in planes and perfect maneuvers and the technology of the airplanes before the men then take them into the front line. Many women will die in those test flights. So women are very much actively involved in the actual fighting military during this war as a result. If you were to be walking up and down the street anywhere in Belleville, really, during this time, you would see these flags. These are called service flags. And what you see, every once in a while, I see them like a little sticker or a decal on the back of someone's car today. Every star represents a person in your family that is serving. So in 1944, for example, you might drive by a house and you'd see these 3 stars. Well, this one's a sad flag because 2 of the stars represent 2 of the family members that are serving in the war. The gold star means someone gave the last full measure of devotion and died for his country. So they were all blue stars, and then you'd put a gold star on top if someone was deceased. And in many families, you would see multiple stars, meaning mothers were sending all of their sons. And that was a pretty, as you can imagine, tough thing to do. On the home front. So of course, men and women sign up to go overseas and fight. But there are people that don't go overseas, but they're very involved and integral into winning this war. There are men that don't qualify to fight. They're too old. They're maybe disabled. Women aren't allowed on the front lines, right? So the government puts together propaganda to try to encourage people to be supportive. I don't know if any of you saw, after we canceled school, the district contacted graduates and asked them to do PSAs. I don't know if anybody saw Daniel Giles explaining why it's important to do your part and stay home and practice social distancing and wash your hands and all that. EJ Liddell did one. If someone that you respect and admire encourages you to do something, you're more likely to do it. And so they created this whole propaganda to try to encourage you to do what's right and help us win the war. So here's one. It's a car sharing club, which is encouraging people to carpool. Because if you are driving a car and someone else is driving a car, and someone else is by themselves in a car, you're wasting gasoline. And fuel is very essential to the war effort. We actually are going to ration fuel during the war. Based on your job and your position in the country, you would get a different amount of gasoline allocated to you per month. If you were an emergency worker, like a fireman, an ambulance, something like that, you would get an X card, which was unlimited. If you were a housewife, you might get an A card, which, just got you to and from what you needed on a daily life. There was also a B card. So people were asked to do their part by limiting consumption. Here you have an example of a propaganda piece. This is called the Jap Trap, which is encouraging Americans to conserve material goods, tin cans, pantyhose, anything, tires, rubber, anything that could be recycled and reused, repurposed for the war. Now, I hope when I turned this slide, you went, oh my gosh, it's offensive by today's standards for sure. And it is, if you look at this image of the Japanese, he's a rat, clearly. He's got a tail. He's got these spiky little paws or whatever you call them. The ears are almost devil-like. Very commonly when there was a Japanese image, the eyes are tiny and very slanted. They would have glasses. Americans, not all Americans, but there was this belief among Americans that the Japanese, their vision was not as good as ours because their eyes were smaller. So you'll often see them with glasses, as in like big glasses. And then you've also got these teeth that are just enormous and buck tooth, which makes them look a little bit dumb. So the idea is to make the enemy look subhuman, because if your enemy is subhuman, it's much easier to try to annihilate them, right? And they're very effective in their propaganda of the Japanese. Um, Here's a couple other posters that you've got. The one here down here in the middle is, of course, my favorite. No one's surprised by that. But Mickey Mouse gets involved, trying to get us to join the military and get involved. Here you have an example of a program or a policy, actually, that FDR and the government worked to try to get Americans that were not off at war to fill the factories. They needed to produce jeeps and tanks and airplanes and boats and food and pots and pans, everything that could be used for the war. Well, we know that in the first half of the 20th century, we unionized. And so this would be a really powerful time for unions to go on strike because they could really hold the government hostage and get high wages. FDR will work hard with the unions to block strikes. And actually, they'll be called something called the Smith-Connolly Anti-Strike Act. You don't need to know that name. But it is aimed at basically telling people either show up to work or go off to war, but you're not going to go on strike. And so the unions agree not to go on strike at this time, which is really pushing away one of their big power rights. And they choose to let that go for a little while so that the common good can be served. As a result, FDR is going to work with what's called the National War Labor Board, and they will increase wages for industrial workers, and they will make some fat money. Oh, maybe the Great Depression will end as a result. Yes, indeed it will. But here you see again another classic image of the Japanese during World War II. He looks a little maniacal and maybe not all that smart, right? That's the goal. Here you had a campaign to try to get women who, as we all know, are very gossipy, to not talk because it could endanger the men. Here they are encouraging you to do with less so that the men have more. So don't drink your coffee so that the men can have theirs. You don't want a sluggish soldier. Yeah, that's a sacrifice that's hard to make, man. Woo, I'd have to think about that. No, I'm just kidding. Here's another Japanese soldier, soldier. Thanks for the can you throw away. Okay, and of course they use kind of the broken English on it. And these all just kind of accumulate to give you a very negative view of the enemy and unite you to try to do whatever you can for our country. So here is the introduction of women trying to be influenced into going into the workforce. So women, as you know, prior to this are moms, right? The men go off to work. They bring home the bacon, so to speak. Women are voting now, but they're really mostly single women are working. When the men go off to war, we need more people to man the industry. And so you've got a lot of propaganda designed to encourage women to go and fight. So we never figured you could do a man-sized job. Good work, sister. But look she's feminine looking. Even though she's in like workman's clothes, she's still very ladylike. I mean, goodness, look at those cheekbones. Then you've got examples of the men sacrificing. So this stuff was everywhere. And they were all designed to get people to do their part. One of the parts that Americans are asked to do is to limit consumption, and we call it rationing. So each family would be given a set of ration stamps. Your average family would get about 48 stamps a month, and each item that was on the ration list. So we create a list of goods that we would like Americans at home to limit so that we can send it over to the men. Coffee, eggs, meat, things like that, like staples that have good nourishment. So maybe instead of having 2 eggs in the morning, you have 1. I mean, bacon, anything really substantial. So you could go to the grocery store and buy a steak, but it might cost you 8 ration stamps. And is that worth it? So this is just another example of people pitching in. There's a little bit of this going on right now. If you go, I mean, you've all seen the shelves. I mean, we've been trying to buy bread for about a week. You got to go at the right time and to the right store, but they're actually putting signs. You've probably seen them at like Target and Schnucks that say limit 1 right? They're limiting people to how many they can buy. So you don't stock up on 47,000 rolls of toilet paper while someone else has none, right? Now, we're not sending these overseas or anything. We're just trying to get people to be able to, go potty and be clean. So that's rationing. And I think you've all heard of it. So my favorite, no surprise, of the propaganda posters is the We Can Do It. And here you have a woman. She is based on a person that this artist saw who actually just died recently. But she gets the nickname Rosie the Riveter. So, and do put this in your notes, Rosie the Riveter. She is an icon. She's not a real person, but she's an image used to try to inspire women to be involved in the war, to go and work in the factories. So you see her, I mean, look at, she's got the beautiful curls. There's a very feminine, cute scarf, plump lips with lipstick. She's got blush. I mean, those eyelashes are beautiful and her eyebrows are on fleek. So, but she's got some guns, right? So here's the first image we really have in popular culture of a woman being beautiful and feminine, yet strong. It used to be one or the other. If you were strong, you were too manly. If you were beautiful, you were just right and dainty and nurturing. But now we start to see this combination that women can be both, that they can be mother and provider. And it's a big moment and a turn in women's history in this country. So women will join the workforce in numbers we've never seen in history before. And while when the war ends, many and most will come back to the home, some stay. And you guys know this, you get your first paycheck and the liberation is unbelievable. Women felt the same way. They get their first paycheck. Some of them don't want to stop. Others will go home and go back into the home, but then they will periodically dream of those days that they had their own money and, their kids were taken care of. Daycare will also start at this time, largely because the women go into the factories. Eleanor Roosevelt is going to be the voice behind starting the first daycares because women were working for the war effort. Now, if some of you are wondering, what's a rivet? I will show you in just a second. So when I was in Pearl Harbor, we were in the airplane hangar and they actually had us rivet. So you've got this drill here and then you had to put these, they almost look like little screws. You put that in there and then you press the button, it goes really loud. The first time I did it, that's me. The first time I did it, it blew me back. Like I almost fell over. It was kind of embarrassing. I thought I was stronger than that. But they did this all day long. I mean, and it was kind of fun for 4 minutes, not all day long. So that's riveting. I'm Rosie the Riveter. Yay me. All right. Now, once this little lecture is over, I'm going to want you to watch a video. I've got the link in the assignment portion of Classroom. I want you to watch this video. It is a propaganda video. Disney actually is going to get involved in the propaganda world, and you are going to see a version of Donald Duck that you have not seen before. I love Donald because he's always crabbing like under his breath. So I think you'll like it. And what you're going to do, your homework tonight, is to watch that video and then come up with like 3 methods that are used to persuade your opinion of the enemy. And you're going to list those 3 and explain what they are. And then you're just going to turn those in on a Google Doc. Last couple things I want to talk about, though, and you're going to see this in that video, is that the propaganda is effective, right? Propaganda today is still effective. Social media blows a lot of things bigger than maybe sometimes they need to be. You can pick your topic. There's 1,000 of them. It is effective. And when Pearl Harbor is bombed, Americans see all Japanese people as a threat. As a matter of fact, Americans see all Asian people as a threat because your average American is not able to look at someone of Asian descent and know the difference especially between Chinese and Japanese. Filipino a little bit better, but if you're living in the Midwest, not as easily, right? But Americans saw Japanese as an absolute threat, and then sometimes that kind of spilled over to all people of Asian descent. So we were sure that every Japanese person that we saw was probably a spy for Japan. We were taken by surprise on December 7th. So FDR decides to issue an executive order. It's Executive Order 9066. In my humble personal opinion, it is his biggest mistake as president. So what he does is he decides to round up the Asian population, the Japanese population, I should say, in the West. And what he's going to do is he is going to place them in internment camps. So you can see these are all the internment camps. They're primarily in the Southwest. California has a ton. You've got some in Washington and in Oregon, a couple there. But primarily, this is where the largest Asian population was and still is. This is not a big surprise probably to most of you. So the Japanese are going to be instructed to bring, some of their belongings. They can't pack up all of them, leave their homes, leave their jobs, and go and stay in these internment camps. Some of them really believed that after the war they could come home and find their home intact and maybe even find their business still there. But people were so appalled and terrified by what happened at Pearl Harbor that some of these businesses were burned down, looted. Homes were they wrote they graffitied and vandalized. It was terrible, and many Japanese lost their entire livelihood. So they were put in these camps, and we just watched some stuff on the Holocaust, and some of you have been to Dachau. You recognize this. This looks a lot like the barracks that you would find in a concentration camp. So they went from being single family homes to now they're living in these communal environments. They're eating in mess halls. They're living behind barbed wire in essentially chicken coops. People could come and visit them. So it wasn't like they weren't being starved to death. They weren't being beaten. That was not happening. But their freedoms were stripped from them just the same because of their ancestry. Some were first generation Japanese. Some were second, third generation. And they handled it in a way that I've never fully been able to understand, but I've always been able to admire. The Japanese wore red, white, and blue whenever they could. On 4th of July, they had huge 4th of July celebrations. They offered to do drives and things to help build up supplies for the war effort. So while they're imprisoned by what they considered their country, they tried to prove their patriotism and their loyalty to that country. I think a lot of populations would say, forget you, and just desecrate the flag. And they chose not to. I had a student in my class many years ago, not all that many years ago, I guess, and her grandmother survived an internment camp. And I said, well, what has she told you about? She said, absolutely nothing. The Japanese culture is not a culture that dwells. I mean, they're a move on, stiff upper lip type of culture. And her grandmother said, while it was upsetting, it was a dark time in her life, she wasn't going to let it define her. And that was a very common perception, really, and way of handling it among the Japanese. So what you guys are going to do, I'm not going to have you start it today. I will give tomorrow morning. The lesson that will be posted will be a reading. You're going to start reading Hotel on the Corner of Bitter and Sweet. So the United States is in the war now. I want you to look at the propaganda video that I just posted, and I want you to just tell me the 3 things. It's a 9-minute video. It's hilarious, and it's very catchy music. You're just going to write down the 3, maybe 4, whatever, things that you think are effective in that propaganda, and then turn that into me. And then tomorrow you will start reading that book. I'm going to give you pretty small readings because we're going to continue. I'll probably do a couple more screencastifies this week. Some days you'll just read, others I'll further you along in the war. And we'll just keep moving forward. I hope you're enjoying the screencastifies. If there's something other than having McGarity in my house with me that you would like to see, I mean, maybe she'll make a guest appearance. But if there's, something you're dying for, let me know. Hope you guys are doing well, and talk soon. Good luck.